If you are a devoted listener to Unfound, please consider supporting this podcast at Patreon, PayPal, or YouTube. Brandon Lee Barron was a 34-year-old from Fayetteville, Arkansas. He loved to sing and cook. On June 23rd, 2020, Brandon's parents saw him walking on the road near their house. They expected to see him at their place in a few minutes. Brandon never arrived. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. In the system I've created of classifying disappearances, we might call the one featured today a walk-off, although ultimately you, the listeners, get to make that decision. However, there is a special kind of walk-off type where witnesses who are believable and honest and have no reason to lie state that a person left. These witnesses believed the person was going to come back, but never did. This is in contrast to when people walk off and nobody is sure about their intentions. What are some of the kind that we've covered on Unfound already? Paris Hobson went for a walk from her family's house saying she'd be right back, but never returned. Jesse Ross, same as Paris, but he left a convention room in a hotel in Chicago and never came back. And early in Unfound's existence, Dominic Hawley Grisham, who left his house while on the phone with someone and never returned, although everyone believed he would be back in a few minutes. What goes on with this type? Were the missing people lying? Did they get lured? What could happen in just a few minutes? Well, with the disappearance of Brandon Barron, although his circumstances are a bit different, the two trustworthy witnesses, his parents, certainly believed Brandon would be at their house very soon. But that didn't happen. And his parents are still waiting. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Linez's website, charleyproject.org. Brandon Barron was raised in a great family. He had a sister who had been adopted and a brother. Brandon wasn't much into sports, but he loved to read. And his personality really came out while cooking and singing, although not necessarily at the same time. However, for a large part of his life, Brandon hid a secret. He heard voices in his head. He never sought treatment, and even during an extended hospital stay, the staff never noticed Brandon's condition. Unfortunately, Brandon ended up dabbling in drugs and became homeless. And near the time of his disappearance, Brandon became paranoid, believing that the government, movie stars, and even his own father were out to get him. So, on June 23rd, 2020, Brandon's father had taken Brandon's mother to a medical appointment. Yet he came home forgetting his phone. While there, his father noticed a wagon in the front yard. Looking through it, the father discovered it was Brandon's. He immediately called the police due to threats Brandon had made against him online. Brandon's father then went to pick up his wife. As they were returning home, within a mile of their house, they passed Brandon walking on the road without that wagon. They didn't stop, once again due to the threats. However, they parked in a spot down the road where they could see Brandon coming, believing he intended to go to their house. Yet Brandon never appeared. He was never seen again. Moreover, once the Barrons arrived at their house, the wagon was gone and is still missing along with Brandon. Please prepare yourselves for an interview where you will hear how a family became terrified of one of their own due to a member's descent into paranoia and addiction. And I ask you to consider how much one illness had to do with the other, while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, is the reason Brandon didn't arrive at the house because he noticed his parents passed him on the road that day? Number 2, what are the odds that Brandon pulled the wagon up to his parents' house that day just when they happened to not be there? And number 3, how can we explain that despite some searches and everyone in the area being aware of Brandon's disappearance, that the wagon has never been located? Brandon's family does not lean toward foul play for his disappearance, but they are open to all ideas. The guests for this episode are Brandon's parents, Daryl and Charley Barron. Unfound News. Mark your calendars right now. Next Thursday, September 14th at 7 p.m., I will be appearing on the Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel for another show with Dr. Telesco. We'll be covering the disappearance and murder of Tyler North. Next, I'll be making my next appearance on a college campus at Florida Southern in Lakeland on September 20th. I'll be doing an updated presentation on the basics of disappearances like I've done at other schools. Finally, everyone should be looking for a bonus podcast episode where I'll be going through all of the unfound nows in which the disappearances have been resolved. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the parents of Brandon Barron, Charley, and Daryl. Charley and Daryl, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Yeah, good to be on your podcast. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
it
you
is.
so much for joining me. And we're everybody should know we're doing this interview on August 21st of 2023. And we were just talking about this before we started this interview, that Daryl and Charley had a chance to meet my assistant Emily, and that's how the two of them have now ended up on Unfound. And I was just telling them they're one step ahead of me. I've never met my assistant Emily yet, but you all met at the Missing Persons Day in Arkansas, right?
It's
Yeah,
never forgotten.
Never forgotten is what they call you.
Okay, and that was back in what, July? It must have been
Yes.
Yes, sir.
July.
I think the
Okay.
18th of July. Yeah.
July 18th. All right, fantastic. Okay, and so and then Emily told me that she had met the both of you. Of course, I became very interested immediately. All right, let's start here. Let's just talk about your family. Of course, Brandon is one of your children. Do you have any other children? What can you say about the Barron house? What would you say?
You want to take that?
No, you will.
Well, we got our family started pretty young. We met and got married in like at 1985, and then shortly after started our family. We had a little hiccup or so. There was like 2 weeks after we got married, Charley had a massive stroke, and on my birthday, so it was a birthday present for me. So,
Oh my God.
but anyways, so they advised us not to have children, but we didn't listen to them, and we ended up having 2 sons. And we really wanted a girl, but they really advised us not to have any more children because of her health. And so the opportunity presented itself for us to adopt a daughter. So we adopted
Wow.
our daughter, who's our youngest. And
Wow.
yeah, it's
And we got 5 granddaughters.
now we have 5 granddaughters.
That's fantastic.
All of our children. We're empty nesters now, so all of our children are grown. So
Congratulations on that. Congratulations. The listeners know, but maybe you two don't know, I am also adopted. I have my parents, Ed and Loretta Densel. My mother's deceased now, but they adopted me, and then I finally got to meet my biological family when I was in my 20s. So I'm adopted as well. I always love hearing a great adoption story. That's fantastic. How close? Yeah, how close are your 3 kids? Of course, Brandon included. How close are they in age?
Brandon and my other son, they're 11 months apart.
11 and a half months. Yeah.
Wow, very
11
close.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then our daughter came in the picture when she was 2.5. We adopted her when she was 2.5.
And she's what?
33.
She's 4 years younger. So she's around 4 years younger than the boy.
Not a huge spread, kind of close for 3 kids, kind of close. Okay. Fine. What's family like going back to when all the kids? What are some of the things that you all like to do as a family, all 5 of you? What are some of the Barron interests?
We're kind of a little bit of an artsy family too. You know, we like to do. Brandon's was always into music. Michael, he was a little bit more into the sports, but Ashton was really into art and things like that. And you know, we always enjoyed music. And you know, I was raised on both kinds of music, country and western. So you know, they're kind of got away from that. I, you know, kind of started listening to some blues and things as I got older, and really liked some of the old Delta blues. And you know, Brandon, he liked a lot of different kinds of music, and you know, loved band and went to college for chorus. It didn't work out well for him. I mean, as far as being able to stay in school. Yeah. But he was the drum major in high school, and you know, just he loved doing that sort of thing. He loved karaoke, anything musical. So.
Yeah, Brandon could always make his mama cry by singing, and
wow,
it just touched my heart so much. I mean, what can you say about, you know, your son singing to you? And
right,
and also he loved both my boys are wonderful cooks.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Brandon. Yeah, my other son still cooks this day, but you know, he just Brandon can make anything out of nothing, you know, and make it delicious. And so, you know, when he came over, he'd fix this meal, or, you know, he loved to fix bread, and he just was a good cook.
Is that something genetic, or is that just something that kind of picked up somewhere? Oh, from Daryl. She's pointing to Daryl. Okay. From
yeah,
Daryl.
I'm a good cook too.
Yeah.
I'm a country cook, but his dad makes beautiful things. He bakes, and they're so beautiful. I can't do that.
That's why I'm kind of fat. So
that's funny. Okay. So all of you, this all growing up, family all together in the Fayetteville area, all growing up in Fayetteville area, or where?
West Fork.
West Fork, Arkansas.
Yeah,
and that's where you live today.
Yeah, we're not in West Fork proper, if you want to call it that. But West Fork's a small town, 1,400 people or something like that.
Very small.
Yeah, it's a pretty small town, but you know, the epicenter of the city, if you want to call it that, is very small itself. But we live like 12 miles out, but that's still kind of that's where our mailing address goes through. Our mail comes through there, so that's our address.
All right, so it's like a one-stop light kind of town, like where I grew up in Lynchburg, Pennsylvania, kind of like that.
I think it actually only has one stoplight. I think you're right.
Okay, that was just a guess. Okay.
All right,
so right there in West Fork, all the kids growing up kind of close in age, got some cooks, got some sports, arts, sounds like a very well-rounded family to me. But we are unfortunately here because of Brandon's disappearance. So let's talk about him now specifically. We've talked about how he was a cook and he liked to sing and stuff, but maybe other things about him going back maybe to his teenage years, kind of back to that time. Anything else maybe about his personality, outgoing, maybe more reserved? What can you say about that? Just so everybody can get to know Brandon.
He loved to read. He would spend all day, all night in his bedroom reading. It was hard to get him to go outside. So when he got in trouble, we had to take the books away from him. And, you know, we might let him do his homework, but we always took the books away from him and made him go outside and play. Now, my other son, we done the opposite. We took the outside away from him, make him read. That's why we punished our boys, because that's the only way it worked. So, I mean, kind of funny, but it's still funny now. But we literally had to pull his books away, and we'd go in there and he had a flashlight under his covers reading.
Yeah, so he was a very proficient reader, and read way above a college level. I think even like when he was in middle school, and he had the highest there when he was in school. I don't know since what's happened since then, but at that time he had the highest. They would award points for reading books or something through the library. They had they call it some kind of score, but he had the highest points of any kid in the school. I mean, even when he was, in middle school, I think. So I don't know if that's
What kind of books was he reading? Nonfiction, fiction, Harry Potter, Tom Clancy? What was he reading?
Usually like fantasy, sci-fi things. Kind of. I know there's this one that I can't think of Ryan O'Reacher or I don't know. There's a character or something from he liked to read the books about this character, and I don't really not sure what kind of what like a series or something, but the name escapes me now. Sorry.
That's all right. That's fine. All right, so those are kind of the books, sci-fi, fantasy, probably not unusual. Too unusual. Going back to my days, mine was like Stephen King and the Hardy Boys, going back, way back. All right, so maybe kind of like to read. It sounds to me like maybe his brother was a little more outgoing with the sports and everything. Brandon a little more reserved. Maybe we might call that introverted a little bit more. What about anything else? About any other interests that he might have had?
He loved people.
Mm-hmm.
He loved people. Period.
He loved his friends. I mean, he valued his friends and his friendships. Maybe he didn't have as many friends as other people, but he would always seem like he had quite a few, but I mean, he always seemed like he was willing to drop things and go help friends if they needed help. So
okay,
and he had
these are friends from like high school. It's in like the same class as
high school, and after he got out of high school too, he met a lot of people. When he was in college and through work, he liked to work in the restaurant industry. So he worked for a number of years as a server, and then eventually, kind of got some kitchen jobs and ended up kind of a sous chef for a catering company, and and had various different jobs inside the restaurant business. So and he met a lot of people through that. And
also karaoke.
Yeah, he did karaoke, and he loved to sing karaoke, and even he got to be a regular and got to know some of the DJs, and they would let him kind of sit in for them some nights if they couldn't be there. So he was kind of doing it, part time, and he also always kind of wanted to be a bartender too, and he would work his bar back when some of the restaurants and stuff, and do some of that kind of stuff. So he liked to.
That would have been into his 20s then? Into his 20s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In 30s.
20 and 20s and 30s, yeah.
Okay. And we have to remember he was in his 30s when he went missing, so we got a lot of time in there between like high school and and then his 30s, of course. You did say that he did go to some had some sort of higher education. Did he end up graduating? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, he graduated high school and
honors
with honors and everything, and he had some opportunities for scholarships, and never really applied for them or took advantage of them. And I think a lot of them were through. I think the reason he didn't do that was because they were through the University of Arkansas here in Fayetteville, and he really didn't want to go to that school. And I think it was probably because he wanted to get out on his own and be his own person and kind of get out away from the shadow of mom and dad, and be where he felt he was free to, do whatever he wanted to do. I work at the University of Arkansas. So he had an opportunity to go there and get a 50% discount just right off the bat. And then if he would have scored a few scholarships, which he probably could have done, well, he had some that were awarded to him. Like I said, he never took advantage of them. And then I told him, son, if you will you know, I never had an opportunity to set back any money for college, but I said, with the discount that I'm able to get for you, and any kind of little scholarships, and if you'll chip in a little bit, I'll chip in a little bit, you could probably graduate debt free. And I said that would really help you out down the road.
Yeah.
And he wasn't interested in that. I kept after him to take advantage of that opportunity, and eventually he became annoyed with it. And one day he just said, "Dad, I would rather go to school." He wanted to go to school in Central Arkansas. It's not part of the university system, and at a college down there. And he said, "I would rather go to school down there and pay $100,000 out of my pocket than to go up here for free."
Wow.
So, okay.
Wow.
If that's what you want to do,
Okay.
You're 18.
Yeah. And so how did that go?
Well, I drove him down to the university down there and let him out. And, he got registered, signed up and everything, and got in a dorm the first semester, I think. And, we would call him and, talk to him, and it seemed to be going all right. But there were things going on, I think, behind the scene that we didn't know about. He was, I think he probably started dabbling in drugs, marijuana. I think it was pretty much exclusively marijuana, and probably alcohol around that time. And so, we found out later, like years later, that there was a couple of public intox charges that he had got while he was down there, and he never let us know that he had them. And so he was kind of secretive in that way, I guess you would say. And he wanted to be free to do his own thing. And I guess he just got too much in on the party scene when he was there, and ended up quitting. Yeah, he dropped out, but he knew that they were going to, he was going to, if he didn't drop out, they were probably going to kick him out, because he was not keeping up with his studies. I mean, he would go to the things he liked. He would go to the chorus classes and the music classes and do okay in those, but then the core curriculums and stuff, he would do what he wanted to do. So,
Charley, would you say that you were surprised by hearing that he had these public intoxications? Was alcohol something that was around your house, or did you two ever catch him doing anything he shouldn't have been doing? Underage, like when he was in high school. Kind of shocked regarding that, Charley.
Well, I wasn't shocked because he was drinking when he left. He never did anything like that around us. Both our dads are alcoholics. They're both passed, so we didn't allow that in our home. So we don't do drugs. We don't. I smoked for a number of years, but I laid those down, and we didn't really drink that much. No, we did have occasional drink when we went out on a cruise, but we just do drinking.
We didn't. It wasn't something they grew up with in the house or anything like that.
So you were so really, you two, when this came out, like you said, years later, you were a little bit surprised that he had these public intoxication, or maybe by that time, maybe some other things had transpired that maybe it wasn't as surprising. What would you say about that?
Yeah, it probably wasn't, but by the time we found out, we knew that he was drinking, and I think he'd even maybe gotten some up here, because he wasn't down there long before he had to come back up here, because he didn't have a way to support himself down there, and didn't have a big enough network of friends or people to be able to stay down there. So he came back up here shortly. It was probably within a year, when he didn't stay down there a year, I don't think. So
I think he stayed down there a year, and he quit school and stayed down there a year. He stayed after he got out of school. I'm sorry. Hang on. My mind don't want to work with my mouth.
I know the feeling.
When
That's
this
fine.
drug,
I'll just set it up this way. So he had the school in the middle of Arkansas didn't go well. So when he moved back, did he move back in with you? And this is when he started doing all
no,
those jobs like the bartending and everything, or what did he do?
No, no, I think I'm not sure where his first place was when he came back up here. Probably moved in with friends. He would quite frequently, seek out some friend or somebody that had a room to rent, or just wouldn't even just he would post ads sometimes and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a room to rent if somebody has a large house and they want to take on a boarder," and he would try to save money like that. Or there was a couple of times that he had an apartment with a young lady at one point, and but that lasted, I don't know, maybe a year and a half or so, and then ended up moving out and going somewhere else. He kind of moved around quite a bit, actually.
Okay. All right, but how in his 20s, being that he wasn't living with you, did you talk to him very often, seeing him quite often?
we did at first more.
Yeah, he would contact us quite a bit, and we would talk to him quite frequently.
Actually, he worked at university for a while.
Oh, did he?
For a couple of years.
Yeah, he worked up there for a little while, and ended up, for I don't know, whatever reason, ended up leaving that job. And it really wasn't something he wanted to do. He just did it because he could make better money doing that than he could,
Right.
working at a lot of these. And he, needed money for rent and things. And
Was he living with us when he started that job at the university?
I don't
This has
recall.
been 100 years ago, so my
Yeah,
mom.
I realize we're just trying to get to know Brandon a little bit, just kind of
Yeah.
what his life was like there in his 20s on his own. That's why I'm
Yeah.
asking these questions. Maybe we
Well,
can move on to this. I know you don't want to go too deep in this, but what about any women in his life at the time? Did he have a girlfriend? Did he ever get married? Did he have any kids? Anything like that?
he had a girlfriend in high school, and he really didn't have any girlfriends till later on in high school, and then like senior year, and then when he did have this young lady, they didn't date very long, and then after once he got out of school, he would not. He was very quiet about his personal life, so we really don't really have a lot of information about who or what he was doing. Unfortunately, as he got older and more toward the end there, I know he was hooking up on some of these apps that you use. I don't know what
Like
all they are.
Tinder, and some of these other apps like that.
Probably,
become,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think he was just doing short term, not anything. Wasn't looking for anything serious, just looking for hookups, I guess.
Okay.
That's what they call them nowadays.
Yeah, I do. Okay, so not really any, and once again, no children.
No children.
No children.
Okay. So he's kind of on his own in his 20s. Taking job, kind of bebopping from job to job. Even worked at the University of Arkansas, I guess, for a little bit. But maybe still having some issues. Maybe with the drinking, and you brought up marijuana that's maybe seemingly got started when he went away to school. For that short amount of time. Okay, so let's move on to this. Because this, of course, is as the listeners are going to hear, is a huge part, I think, of this disappearance. So we need to understand it. When did you two start worrying or wondering about Brandon's mental health? Of course, we talked about going away to school and drinking, and I never got into that stuff. I'll have to admit, I was a goody two shoes, but most college students do that.
Right.
But the mental health, when was that something that maybe was it face to face or was it over the phone? You started wondering, I don't know if something's going on here. Do you remember that point?
Good answer.
I will.
Go ahead.
We started noticing, well, when we were in Chicago for in 2019, middle of September. We were down there for a month. In the middle of, I was getting treatment to get better, and it was
CRPS.
medical. And so in the middle of that, he gets a phone call for Brandon. He was in jail. And you take it over now.
Well, I think there had been clues before that, you know, sometimes you can look back in hindsight and say,
Right,
well,
sure.
you know, there were things going on that maybe we didn't put together at the time, and, you know, this kind of seemed odd or peculiar. But you know, but I did talk to him later, and he did tell me that he had heard voices for years.
Oh, is that right?
You know, going back a long way, and you know, and I always kind of wondered, well, why didn't he say anything about it? But then someone else told me and brought up a point, and they said, well, you know, a lot of times people who experience that for years and years of their whole life, they don't really see it as abnormal. They think, you know, they don't understand that other people don't do that, you know, so it takes them a while to kind of figure out that it's maybe not something that everybody has. So, so, you know, but we started noticing it around about, I mean, really became apparent around about the time into 2019 or something, late 2019. And, you know, before that, he had became more distant and didn't seem like he wanted to, you know, we try to call him up and he wouldn't answer his phone, or we would have a lot of trouble getting a hold of him. And
that was in 2017 when we couldn't, the whole year, you just
it was
looked him over.
Kind of like, you know, we could rarely see him, and, you know.
Oh, I take that. He lived with us through 2016. The end of 2016, he was really, really sick.
Yeah.
And he had to put his job on hold. The apartment he's living with told the guy he's gonna be with us. He was so sick. And I just watched my son pass away from my eyes. And so I begged him to go to the hospital, and finally we got him to the hospital after living with us a month. And I was literally watching him take his last breath. So we got him in the hospital. He had several pints of blood. And so he was in there, 10 days?
Yeah, he was in there a while.
Yeah, he's in the hospital 10 days. And we kept him until his 30th birthday? 2017.
You know, it was probably close to his birthday when he finally let go.
Yeah, so he moved us into November, and he stayed until April. He was really weak. So
what was he suffering from? What did the hospital have to say about this?
Well, he had a really, really bad lung problem going on. I mean, there was multiple things I think going on, but like they called one of them histoplasmosis or something like that, and it was you know, he blamed it. He lived with a guy that had a cat that he hated, and he said there, you know, that, and there was a lot of black mold and things going on inside that apartment and things like that, and he got really, really sick, and you know, he never had a really robust immune system anyway, so you know, he was kind of prone to some things like that. But anyway, he was just, it took him a while to figure out. Well, I think it's not something that's very, you know, really, really common. So it took him quite a while to figure out what was wrong with him. And then they started putting him on some really, really heavy duty antibiotics, and that caused some issues, you know, other issues, because he was taking, you know, intravenous and then plus other types of antibiotics. And he was really, really sick for a while. And, you know,
so when he was in there, he's saying like this is about 2017, and he said he had been hearing these voices for years. This is not something that maybe anybody at the hospital, being that they're monitoring him every day, they're, like you said, at least 10 days, something that never came up during that time.
Well, now, I kind of have a problem keeping things in chronological order.
That's
I don't think it was till after that, after, he had gotten better and was out on his own. And then when it became, I think finally at some point, he started sending us very bizarre text messages.
That was the end of 2019.
In the end of 2019, he started sending very bizarre text messages and, just very peculiar behavior. Then we would notice things on his Facebook that he posted at one point, like a 3-hour rant. And it was just, crazy talking off the wall stuff. And we were like, what's going on,
That was in 2017, 2018.
Yeah. So, and at that point, I did get a chance to talk to him at one point and then he finally said, I'm hearing these voices. And he said, it's your voice that I'm hearing.
Wow.
And
your voice, Daryl, your voice.
Yeah, that's what he
Wow.
said. He said there's sometimes there were other voices, but he said predominantly it was my voice that he would hear. And, and I asked him, I said, well, how long has this been going on? He said, then that's when he told me that he had been hearing voices for, a long time. He said, maybe I can't remember if he said something like as far back as I can remember, or, it was a long period of time.
Okay.
But,
so once again, going back to when he was in the hospital for that time, it seems he had started hearing voice in his head, hearing your voice, Daryl, well before he went to the hospital. And once again, this is not something that ever came up, even though he was being examined for all those days, that they, I guess what I'm saying is he seemed to be able to keep this really hidden from people.
Right. Well, I think he was for sure hearing voices, but I'm not sure if it just morphed into being my voice later or what.
That's what he said.
Yeah, because he never really mentioned it being my voice until later, like toward the end of 2019. And
that was in the podcast. That was not a podcast, but the
rant. Well, that was in 2019 as well, wasn't it?
I just got through telling you it was the end of 2017, early 2018.
Okay, well, I guess maybe he did. He just didn't tell me that it was my voice that he was hearing at that time. But he was. I kind of lost my train of thought.
That's
Sorry
all right.
about that.
We can. That's fine. I just want to establish. It's very interesting to me, and probably interesting to the listeners, that you say had been suffering from this for years. I'm perfectly believe that. But even under a doctor's care, even in the hospital, even where he's being seen day after day after day, it doesn't seem like anybody there noticed this, or he kept it under wraps, or he knew not to talk about it, or something.
We couldn't find out his medical history.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's
they will not tell us nothing, but he hung any signs up all in the hospital room. Keep out, or just
he did.
Yes, he did.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There was signs in there when we come in there, and you don't pay attention, but there was signs when you walked in. Keep out, just weird signs, and that didn't dawn on me. That he just didn't want certain people in there. It was, there's doctors he didn't want him to come and see him. He just wasn't, to me, I started blaming his being sick.
Yeah.
But it didn't dawn on me. Matter of fact, it didn't dawn on me till just now, but he did have signs hanging up in his front of his door.
Okay. Let's move on to this. All right. So we got some mental health issues. We're going to talk about that a little later. So, and also, though, it seems at least maybe closer to his disappearance that he had been doing other drugs other than marijuana. He'd gotten into, drugs that we might say are much more dangerous. Don't need to jump too deep into this, but just to understand, when did you become aware of this? Was this before or after his disappearance? How did that all come out?
Well, before his disappearance, definitely. Me and him had conversations about drugs because I knew that he did marijuana, and I had talked to him, and then I think a couple of times I was concerned because he had said something about doing LSD, and I told him, man, that's really bad for you. You shouldn't do that, and he's like, well, no, Dad, and he said that there's drugs that are okay to use, then there's bad drugs, and that's when he explained to me that doing drugs like marijuana, it actually could have medicinal purposes. And he talked about doing LSD a few times and kind of more exotic things. Like he talked about using some kind of drug that they extracted from morning glory seeds. I don't know what that is.
Okay.
And then some peyote and stuff like that. But he told me, he said, there are certain drugs, he said, I will never do. He said, I would never do meth and I will never do heroin. He said, those are, those are really, really bad drugs. And he said, you'd have to be stupid to do those drugs, and that's what he told me.
Okay.
And so I never thought he was, I knew, like I said, he was doing the marijuana, which I didn't condone, didn't approve of, and and other drugs too. So, I said we raised him in essentially an alcohol-free home, drug-free home. We didn't do that stuff. I think I tried marijuana like twice when I was in high school and never saw any kind of benefit for it. So I just something I never did. But so it was kind of a shock to us to learn that he had, when we get the phone call that he's in jail and for possession of methamphetamines and meth, and it was because he had told us, hey, I would never do that because that.
When did that happen? If you that phone call that's on your mind right at this second, when was that phone call approximately?
Mid-September, probably 2019.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
because we were in Chicago for pretty much the whole month of September, and it was about halfway through our stay in Chicago.
We was up there. He called right in the middle. I was in the middle of September. We was in there until the middle of October.
Okay,
Wow.
so it was earlier in our stay, but yeah, we were in Chicago for a good a while there. Getting some medical treatment, and but yeah, it was a shock to us. And then we were got phone calls from family that he was acting bizarre, and at one point my sister-in-law sent me a text message and said, hey, did you see this? And she had put up not Facebook, Craigslist post that he had put my picture on Craigslist and said, has anyone seen this man roaming around Fayetteville? Fayetteville, somewhere near the university campus, and possibly has like a black box that resembles a boom box, and he was, and that's when he started coming out with the whole thing about the voice to skull thing. I guess apparently there are people who, and there you can Google it and look it up. There's web people who think that they're being targeted by the government, and the government is using this voice to skull B2K technology to beam frequencies into their head, and they can make voices and things. And he became convinced that he was a victim of this being targeted by the government. So,
and he had a golden ear.
Yeah, something called a golden ear. I'd never heard of that before.
Me neither. I guess maybe the listeners can look that up. All right. So he says that he'd never get into meth and heroin, but then you find out, you get this call. That's exactly what he got into. Just to sum this up. Okay. So this is why we have to move on to this. So he did end up, because of this, having troubles with the law. And, not terribly long before he went missing. And in fact, they actually put a wrist monitor on him. Was it because of this particular circumstance that you're talking about, or was it something else?
Yeah, it was because of the methamphetamine possession that he had. But,
Okay.
He had also, I guess, I don't know if you wanted to get into that this time, but, he had made some death threats, but that really had nothing to do with, the being incarcerated with wrist monitor situation. Okay. I mean, he was incarcerated, and then due to COVID, they released, the vast majority of their inmates, only the most most violent people were kept in jail. And so they gave everybody a wrist monitor and a cell phone, and, said, here you go, and turn them loose. And which and especially in hindsight, it would have been better for Brandon if he would have stayed in jail, and possibly could have gotten some treatment or something. But yeah.
Okay, but he had this wrist monitor. This was part of his being let out during COVID. We have to remember this disappearance happened in 2020. So this is part of the thing, him being let out. He was given this wrist monitor.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And
but he cut it off.
Yeah, at some point, I mean, he would, I think in the beginning he was being compliant with, taking, they would, I guess they would, I think the way it worked is they would send him a random text message and say, hey, send us a photo of where you're at and hold up your wrist so we can see the wrist monitor. And that way they could kind of check up on him and see where he was at and things. And in the beginning, he was, compliant with them. And then later on, he would send me text messages or call me and say, Dad, something's wrong with this phone. It's not letting me call, and I said, well, you're calling me. And he said, well, but I can't get through to their number. And it's supposed to be a number that I can get to anytime. And can you send them a message and tell them that I'm having trouble with this phone and it's not working, and tell them that, I'm trying to check in. And so I said, well, I'll tell them, but I don't know if that's going to help you or not. So, I did that a couple of times for him. And, like I said, I don't know how they respond to things like that. If that's acceptable to them or not, I really wouldn't think it would be. But anyway, he was having a lot of problems with the wrist monitor. And I don't know if it was, I don't know if it was because of his paranoia and he thought maybe it was something that was being used to help the voices, to be able to track it, which it definitely was tracking.
Sure.
But at some point, I guess he thought it was a good idea to cut it off. And the very last photo they have on that phone before, he lost it or it came up missing or whatever happened to it, it was a picture of him holding up the wrist monitor that was cut off. And he took a picture of himself holding it up while it was cut off. So
when did that happen? Approximately in 2020, approximately when?
Yeah, I'm going to say it would have been early on in 2020.
It'd be an end of May.
Yeah, probably.
Because he came up missing in June.
Yeah.
And would it be?
Maybe late April, early May, something like that.
Well, let me think back, because he come back to Fayetteville around his birthday. He called his dad up and said, come and get me. Did he still have the monitor on there? Because I think he already cut it off.
I'm not sure. I don't recall whether he had the monitor.
When is Brandon's birthday? What's his birthday?
April the 7th.
All right. Okay. So let's just say maybe, being that the accepted disappearance date is June 24th of 2020, it's very possible that he had cut that monitor off his wrist maybe 2 months before he went missing. That's maybe a good guess. Okay. Do you think because of that, of course, we know criminals or, felons who are supposed to be in jail and are let out, they're not supposed to do that. Do you think that the police were looking for him? What is your understanding of the consequences of him taking that monitor off?
And we did talk to the people who managed that the program that was responsible for taking care of the wrist monitors and things like that. And they called us, I think, once or twice and asked if we knew where he was at, and we told them no. And they listed him as absconded, and then I think that eventually led to I don't think it happened until later, but eventually it led to a warrant being put out for his arrest.
We had a court date.
And, plus he missed a court date. And so, they were looking for him. So,
okay. All right. So he's already in trouble with the law. He gets out, they let him out due to COVID. He has this wrist monitor. He cuts it off, let's just say approximately in April of 2020. What was he doing as far as a living situation at that time, in those few months before?
Yeah, at that point, I think it became increasingly difficult for him to hold down a job. And as a consequence, he didn't have money to be able to afford rent. So he very soon found himself homeless. And a few months prior to that, back in February the 14th to be exact, he did put a death threat out against me online. And then later he becomes homeless. And, we were very hesitant to, because we knew he was having these mental issues and things. And we were hesitant to have him move back in our home with us.
Of course.
And he did ask a couple of times, but typically when he would come to our house to stay the night, even when we were on better terms, or he wasn't, in his paranoid state, he would only stay for maybe a day, maybe two, because he wanted to be around a bigger city, because he loved his freedom, and he wanted to be where there was public transportation was readily available.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay.
Because he didn't really drive.
But
Let's talk now. Please go ahead, Charley, please.
The only thing of it is, we weren't even involved in his life at that time. For several couple of years. He wouldn't let us in. Every time we called him, he would not answer his phone. Oh, I'm sleeping. And at that time he made the death threat in February.
Yeah.
We wasn't even talk. We would talk to him on the phone, but he'd call us.
Yeah.
But he wasn't calling us.
Yeah,
he was making us death threats.
He kind of became distant there the last year or two, so.
And I think it was because of drugs, because he didn't want us to know that he was on drugs.
Right. Right. Let's talk about those death threats a little a little deeper, Daryl. That one you talked about, February 14th, 2020, was that the first one?
That was the first one that we were made aware of, and the way we found out is my daughter was over and visiting, had our grandkids over, and it was dark, I think, at the time. That it was getting later in the evening. Don't recall the exact time, but all of a sudden we have Washington County Sheriff's Department pull up, and they get out, and we're like, what are they doing here? And then they came up and said, well, we're here to do a welfare check. And we're like, okay, whose welfare are you checking on? And they said, well, we've been made aware that do you know a Brandon Barron? I said, yeah. And well, something happened to Brandon. They said, no, he's apparently been posting or been communicating threats online. I think he didn't really post them. I think it was some things that he had said in Messenger to some friends of his, and they became concerned, because he had this plot to kill me, because, I was torturing him with the voices. And then he started, later he told us that, that, and some of this was on that rant that he had put on Facebook, that I was working with government and Hollywood actors, the judicial system. We were all in cahoots, and they were either working for me or I was working for them. I'm not sure which, but it was all a big plot to get him. And he had this thing called a golden ear, and they were utilizing this V2K voice to skull technology. And he was being tormented, and so that's what the death threat stemmed from.
Okay. How often did this happen between February 14th and the time of his disappearance? Was this a common occurrence that he was posting things online, or?
Not to our knowledge. He could have been doing it more than that, and we just didn't know. But we were only made aware of two times: the February, and then the day of his disappearance, he made another death threat. So
okay, so several months. 1, 2, 3, like 4 months between that one and February 14th, and then the one on the day of his disappearance. So that's over 4 months. So not common, still horrible. I can't imagine Daryl being, and of course I just can't imagine being in a situation where you have your son who's, saying something like this. It's horrible. But it was these two times, February 14th and then June 24th of 2020.
Right. But in between those times, there were a lot of bizarre text messages, maybe not, death threats, but, just strange things, and, maybe veiled threats, if I find out that you're involved in this, I swear to God, it's not going to be good for you, or stuff like that, and he would think that all the voices he was hearing was something that I was doing. So.
Okay. Now he wasn't living with you, so being that this threat happened and he's saying all these bizarre things and everything, did you ever get an idea? Was there any I don't know if I have it in the outline like vandalism or anything, but you weren't living with him. Did you ever get any feelings that Brandon was showing up at your house when you weren't around? Anything
No.
like that, like stalking both of you, given once again that he said he had these voices in your head, hearing you eventually, Daryl, anything like that he might have been following you two around, given that he had this kind of this kind of thinking.
He was in Fort Smith.
Yeah, I mean, he was in Fort Smith for a while during that, but he never, as far as we know, never came out and did any sort of vandalism or threatened really to do vandalism. Now, there was at one point he talked to a friend of his, and he wanted her to drive him. See, that was a lot of the problem was there's like a 20-mile distance, and Brandon doesn't drive, so transportation to be able to get out to do anything like that to us or wasn't readily available to him. But he did talk to a friend of his to ask her if she would bring him out here and park down at the end of our driveway. And he wanted to come to our house and steal my cell phone.
Wow. I'm guessing she didn't go along with that.
No, she didn't go along with it.
When was that? How close to his disappearance was it? Can you remember?
It was. Do you know when it was? I'm thinking, was it early 2020 or late 2019?
Okay.
It was 2020.
Wife thinks it was in 2020, but
it had been 2020.
Okay. What would I have to? Of course, you have two other children. What were they saying about? I'm not here. I'm not here to. I'm not. I want you to put words in their mouths or anything. But just in general, what were your two other children, saying about all this?
Well, Michael, of course, he lives in Southern Arkansas, so they really didn't see each other a lot, mostly on holidays and things. So he was kind of insulated from the whole situation and really didn't have much interaction with his brother. They were, once they were close when they were living at home, but once they got out on their own, they kind of went their own ways. And Brandon had his life and Michael had his life, and they would, catch up on holidays and things, but they didn't really interact a lot. So I don't think Brandon knew a lot about it. I mean, Michael knew a lot about it, but now his sister Ashton, the youngest, she for a while, Brandon, when he was during that, when did she live? Brandon lived with her for a little while. I'm not sure. Was it?
Okay.
It was
probably the end of April of 2020 to middle of May.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is around the time that he would have had this monitor cut off, maybe around that time that he's living at his sister's.
Yeah, he's staying there for a while, trying to get back on his feet. And then, we, of course, by that point, we know that he's got methamphetamine problem. His sister alerts us that, she's very concerned about him and she doesn't feel safe having him in her home. And so she has 3 children, small children, and he's acting bizarre. And she discovered needles in her toilet, like hypodermic needles in her toilet. So she knew he was doing some kind of drug. And I'm kind of ignorant on stuff like that. I just thought meth was something you smoked in a pipe or something. I didn't know you could shoot it up, or I don't know. It could have been some other kind of drug he was shooting up, but he was shooting up something apparently.
Yeah.
Then she asked him to leave.
She asked him to leave.
Of course.
And, at that point, we were kind of heavily involved in trying to get him someplace where he could be safe and not be homeless, because he had been couch surfing a lot, and it was kind of the same story from all of his friends.
It's wrong part.
That was after that.
That was before. This was when Ashton she took him to a motel
Well, I understand that, but before that, he was couch surfing and stuff. But anyway, he had kind of burned his bridges with his friends because he would come in and they would see the bizarre behavior, and so they, a lot of them said the same thing. He came stayed for a couple of days, and we ended up saying, Brandon, you got to go. You can't stay.
And they still, no matter what, they still, loved him, and
yeah, they still counted him as a friend, but they just couldn't have that.
No, of course,
in their home. So, but we were trying to help him, and it's about that time that the stimulus came out, and I think everybody was getting $1,400 or something like that. And I didn't feel comfortable having him live with us, but I was giving him a little bit of money here and there, and predominantly when I say giving him money, it was more buying things for him, and he'd say, well, I'm going to pay you back. And I said, well, we'll talk about that later or whatever. And I paid to put him up in a hotel room for like a week at one point, and paid for some other stuff, for cell phone for him, and, just miscellaneous things that he needed. But I told Shelly, I said, when he gets the stimulus money back, if we see he's doing good with the money and doing, things he should be doing to help his situation, I'm going to tell him he doesn't have to repay me or anything, because he'd say, I'll pay you back when I get the stimulus. And well, don't worry about it. But anyway, he finally got the stimulus back. It was kind of quite a process doing that, because I had to get him a birth certificate, and I had to drive him around to try to get, because the stimulus money had been deposited on an Emerald card, and he threw the card away after he spent his tax refund. But then, they put it back. That's where the stimulus ended up going. But he initially got the card because of a tax refund. So, to make a long story short, we finally get the stimulus. He gets access to those funds. He gets his card back, and immediately upon getting that, he tells his sister, okay, I want you to drive me to Fayetteville, and I want to go find some drugs, and I want to go rent a hotel. And he said, I want to find a hookup, and I want to do drugs and have sex and party. So, needless to say, I wasn't very pleased with his choices of how he was spending his stimulus money. So, after a few days of him being out and doing whatever he was doing, I, sent him a message, and I said, hey, Brandon, glad to hear you got your stimulus money back. That's awesome. I said, do you think you'd be able to pay me back the money you owe me? He became very angry and said, I'm not able to pay you the money back. You keep having people steal my ID and my wallet, and I don't have any of my, I don't know if he was, doing drugs and passing out with these people that he was hooking up with, and they were stealing stuff, or he was just losing it or whatever. But,
he used it all.
It wasn't good. He, didn't set well with him. And then I think, this is kind of, maybe, I know you don't like speculation, but it seemed like every time he would have an encounter with the police, he would think that I would have something to do with it. Like I had, sent them to do things to him, or,
I'm not surprised, given how you've portrayed, him hearing these voices that eventually became your voice, and he wanted to go over to your house and get your phone, and, saw the wrist monitors maybe being tracked. Of course, he was being tracked, but tracked more like in a conspiratorial sense.
Exactly.
I can't say that surprises me at all, Daryl, that he would think that.
I guess he went to a town in Rogers, and we got a thing in the mail saying that they had his wallet.
The police department had his wallet.
And so I sent him a text message and showed him the letter, because that's the way we got all of his mail. And so he would tell us to open it up, take a picture of it, and he'd comment later on it and say if he wondered.
We'd send it to him in Facebook Messenger, and then he would say, oh yeah, that's nothing, throw it away. Or he'd say, oh yeah, I need that, save it, don't, I'll bring it to me the next time you see me or something,
Okay.
So
he went off on me and told me to keep his name out of my mouth, and to if I want to talk to, I'll be talking to his lawyer because he's going to take me to court because I sent a letter to him.
All right, so nothing really is going very well there in 2020 at all. Okay. Where was Brandon living in the days before his just some very pointed questions here before we move into that day. Where was Brandon living in those few days before he went missing, as best as you can tell?
For the most part, he was homeless. He was essentially staying in a wooded area behind a Walmart in Fayetteville, from what we understand. But yeah, he was homeless.
Okay. Would you say we know that there was the death threat on February 14th and then the one on the day of his disappearance, June 24th. But would you say either of you were living in fear of him? I mean, given all of this, of course, you just talked about he's going to see you and everything. But were you ever afraid, for example, that he was going to show up at your house, that follow through with anything like that?
Not until that day.
Well, you had expressed to me that you didn't feel comfortable with him living with us, so I think there was definitely some apprehension on Shelley's part, because
I was in a wheelchair.
She was, she's disabled and doesn't get around all that well, and I work third shift, so she's home alone at night a lot of times, and she was just worried that he might try to come out and do something. And I think at that time, or shortly after that, is when we had some security cameras installed, because we didn't have anything like that. And I had it on my phone, so if I was at work and I saw something happening or heard some alarms go off or something, then I could call somebody and they could get there, and or I could take off or whatever. But yeah, she was definitely apprehensive, and I didn't, and understandably so. And I tried to be sensitive to that. So I never really thought that he would, actually hurt me, but I don't know. You never know what
can
somebody
tell.
like that.
Never can tell. Okay. And being due to this, him cutting this monitor off, what was there a warrant out for his arrest at the time of his disappearance?
I don't believe so.
No.
The wheels of justice grind slowly, so I think it was, quite some time before they actually got around to processing that to where there was actually a warrant put out for him. So.
Let's move up to that day now, June 24th, 2020. We're going to start very early in the morning, and it starts, I guess, at this Walmart in Fayetteville. First of all, how did you find out about this story about Brandon being at this Walmart and something going on? Of course, you didn't find out about this till later, I guess, but how did you find out about it?
Well, I think it was shortly after Brandon's disappearance that we were made aware that he had an encounter with Walmart, at Walmart with the police, and it was in the PM hour. Well, it was, I don't know if it was actually ever expressed that they had said it was, I don't know, like 4 or 5 p.m. or something, like 4 or 5. I think it was just relayed to us as like 4 or 5 o'clock, something like that, something generic. And the way the detectives talked to us and told us and everything, we were led to believe that encounter happened after we saw him out here.
Okay. But you don't think, but do you now think that happened before?
Oh, it definitely did happen before.
Okay. All right. So the way, let's just say it the way it actually happened in real life. So there was something that went on at this Walmart, and what exactly did go on?
Well, from what we understand, he was acting kind of bizarre or whatever. So people were concerned about his health, and he was he was contacted by police, and they brought out an ambulance for him, and he refused medical treatment. So the ambulance ended up leaving, and I guess they just let him go, and he went back to his homeless encampment in the woods. But
he's also sitting on there threatening his dad.
Was he doing that at the Walmart?
All right.
I don't know if it's at Walmart or we don't know where he was at. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, on Facebook, he said, "I need to get a gun to shoot my dad before he shoots me."
Yeah, that was after the Walmart encounter. Okay. So that's another thing where the police contacted him. He probably, and again, this is a little bit of speculation, but he probably thought, well, my dad's did it again. He's turned me in or something. So, or had the police come and contact me. So, yeah, he did put out another death threat at that time. So.
All right, so we have February. This is the second one. We have February 14th, and then we have this one on June 24th of 2023 or 2020, which is, of course, the day June 24th, 2020 of his disappearance. Okay, so this is the second one at 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so we have to now talk about this. So we have this issue. He refuses an ambulance. He goes back to doing that. How far is this Walmart from your house?
It's approximately 20 miles.
20 miles. Okay. What were your plans for that day of June 24th, outside of the stuff going on with Brandon? What were your two plans for that day of June 24th, 2020?
Well, it was just a little bit convoluted, but I'll try to step through it. Shelley at that time was going to a clinic in Fayetteville for treatment for CRPS. And she would stay most of the day, like 4 days a week. And so on that particular day, I was going to take her to the clinic. And Shelley and I had talked it over, and we decided we were going to try to accomplish two things as far as Brandon was concerned. We wanted to get a protection order against him.
Okay.
We were going to set it up, structure it so that he could still contact us by phone, but he was not to show up at my work, or he was not to show up at our home, And so we were going to do that. And the other thing we were trying to get was a involuntary commit order to get him some help,
Wow.
get him somewhere and try to get him some help. We were very concerned with him, of course. And you have something to say?
Yeah, because we kind of skipped a little part between going to our day. At 5 o'clock that morning, we have another knock on the door from the police saying that Brandon wanted to kill his dad.
Yeah,
right. That's where that all came from, this protection order and everything else, because you found out about this. I'm just worried about your physical trip. Where were you driving to and for the day?
Yeah. Sorry, we got sidetracked, but
That's all right.
So I was going to take her to the clinic, and then my plan was to go to the police station or to wherever. I wasn't even sure where I needed to go, but I figured the police station could point me in the right direction as to who I needed to talk to get a protection order, and then maybe an involuntary commit order. So those were my plans. I drove her to the clinic, and then when I arrived at the clinic, I realized I had left my cell phone at home. And I had been told, by someone that you can't just go up and for any random reason get a protection order against somebody. You have to show that there's a justifiable reason to have a protection order. Well, I had evidence on my phone, the threats and the things that he would made, and some of the bizarre emails and statements. So I wanted to be able to show that to the police. So I thought, I have to have my cell phone to do this. So I drove back home, and upon arriving at home, I pull up in my yard, get out of the vehicle, and walk up the path there. And just before I get to the house, I noticed there's a wagon sitting there. And initially I didn't, what's this? Whose wagon is it? I didn't really know per se that Brandon had a wagon, but I thought it was kind of bizarre. So I walk over and I kind of start looking through some of the stuff in the wagon, and I realized, hey, this is Brandon's stuff. I recognized some books that he had, and I think I'm not sure, there was some like audio equipment, maybe some headphones or something, and a bunch of clothing and things like that. And I recognized, I said, this is Brandon's stuff. So
okay, let me jump in here for just a second. So had it not been for you forgetting your phone, you would not have gone back home. You would have just done that police stuff and then gone back to pick Charley up.
Correct. Yes.
All right. So it was a complete coincidence or circumstance, unusual set of circumstances here, where you had to go back home to get your phone, which of course we all understand. And it's then there that you see this red wagon. We'll get back to that in a second. How long would you say you were gone between leaving your home in that morning, dropping Shelley off, to getting back to your house? How long would you say you were gone?
before we're leaving Shelley and then getting back to town.
No, just going from your house to dropping off Shelley to going back to home. How long did that take?
It was probably, hour and 15 minutes.
Okay. All right. So in that hour and 15 minutes, seemingly, Brandon showed up at your place with this wagon.
Right.
Okay, very good. So please continue. So you see this wagon, you don't necessarily, and when we're saying wagon, we're saying like a beach wagon or something like that, or something people should be visualizing in their heads, a little red wagon or something maybe more 21st century, like plastic with like rubber wheels or something.
It's more of a beach style wagon, and it was
Mhm.
as I recall, a dark blue color kind of, and
Okay.
it was one of these, fold up things. Now, when I say a beach wagon, of course, they make them for sand that have the big wheels on it. This didn't have the big wheels; it just had standard wheels on it. But just a wagon, something you'd use for a kind of a portable cart,
Okay, so you see that, of course, it's not yours, it's not Shelley's, and you go over it and you quickly discover that it is Brandon. What do you do when you discover this? Of course, you already know at that point that he's made these threats against you and everything. I'm sure you became very apprehensive about, he must be on the property somewhere. What'd you do?
Kind of start looking around, saying, "Okay, where's he at?"
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I initially was just, well, I'm just going to go in and get my phone and leave. And then I thought, well, I don't really know. He could be inside my house, and if he already posted a thing asking for someone to furnish him a gun, say he did get the gun, he could be in the house hiding with a gun.
Could be.
So, I felt very uncomfortable about going in the house because I didn't want to be put in a situation where I had to hurt him or he was going to hurt me. So I said, well, I'm just going to go call the police and let them come out and deal with this. So, of course, I didn't have my cell phone. It was in my house. So I ended up going to a neighbor's house that's, a few hundred yards away and using their phone and calling the police. And eventually, I don't think it's maybe 30, 40 minutes later, the police show up. They, looked the wagon over and I kind of explained to them what was going on. And of course, they had already responded out earlier that morning. So they were aware of the death threats.
Yeah.
And they said they were going to clear the house for me. So they, get their guns out and they go through my house and, hollering and looking around and looking, under stuff and in stuff. And they can't find hide or hair of Brandon. And then they go through my little outbuildings and, looking all around the yard and everywhere and kind of little bit in the wooded areas around the house. No one ever saw Brandon. So we don't know where he was, if he was hiding somewhere or where, but there was no Brandon to be found. And eventually the police, load up and leave. And then I, go in the house, get my cell phone and drive back to town and proceed about what I was doing,
Right. Now, that wagon, was it like parked like right at your front door? Was it front like the garage door? It was on the side of the house? Where was it?
Yeah, I've got a deck that's off the front, and it wasn't it wasn't on the deck, but it was out in the yard, a little ways from the deck, and probably 8 8 feet from the deck, but it was from my door where you actually enter my house. It was probably 20 feet or so.
Okay. All right. So you get out of there. You get your cell phone. Did you end up going to the police then to file this? Did you ended up doing all that stuff?
Yeah, I got all that stuff started, and I got notified that later that day that they had approved the protective order, and I guess the involuntary commit order takes a little longer because I think it has to maybe go before a judge or somebody has to approve that. So I get the protective order and or get notified that it's. Did we go by and pick up the paperwork before we came home? Or I can't recall.
No, I was in clinic, but the thing it was, I think it was the next day you got the protective order.
Was it the next day?
Because we had to call the police again.
Okay, well maybe it was the next day. Like I said, things are foggy at that time. You're not trying to commit things to memory because you don't really realize it's going to be relevant to later.
Yeah, of course.
But anyway, at some point, after I get that business taken care of, I go back and pick up Shelley. And I think we had a few little errands to run. Don't recall what they were. And then ended up making our way back home. and we were kind of wondering if we were going to see Brandon on the road, or somewhere on the way home. And sure enough, we were about a mile from our home, and we kind of round some little corners, and we see Brandon walking, and he's walking against traffic, and on the opposite side of the road that we're traveling on, but he's walking toward our house.
Walking toward him, very important here. Walking toward your house on the opposite side of the road. Okay, so he has his back to you as you're coming up behind him.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. All right.
And we drive right on past him. Don't stop or look or anything. Or it was I'm kind of looking in my mirror, and I can see his face is very red looking, and he looked like, to me, I thought he looked like he was very hot, but being June the 24th in town, Arkansas, it was pretty warm. But Shelley thought he looked really angry, and he would get red in the face like that when he was angry too. So whether anger or heat, he was dressed in predominantly dark clothes, looked like he had like some dark pants on and a dark colored shirt. Not sure if they were exactly black, but they were dark colors, very dark colors. And he looked like he was kind of pretty tired, but really red faced and maybe angry. Shelley thought he looked angry.
You had to be shocked. Did you, should ask you, did you know it was him before you ever passed him? Before you saw his face, did you know?
Yeah, pretty. We saw him, and we recognized him from the rear even.
Okay.
For
even a split second, did you think about stopping?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, well, should I stop? Should I not stop? But because that's where I'm thinking, because we wanted them to wasn't part of the reason we called the police is because we wanted them to serve him with that. Okay, maybe not. Maybe I'm getting it mixed up.
No, because he was already threatening his dad. Mm-hmm. And I thought he was going to come out there and kill us.
I don't think anybody can argue with that thought. That's what I would be thinking too. Right.
Well, we ended up calling the police for whatever our rationale was.
That was the reason.
Okay, no, that's understandable. Yeah. So we ended up calling the police, and they came back out, and we had to. We proceeded on up the road. We didn't stop. And like I said, it was almost exactly a mile to our house. Mm-hmm. And we live on we have a little corner that we go around, and then we have a long driveway that turns off to the left, and you go down across the little low water bridge kind of thing, and then up a hill. And we live far enough off road that our house is not really visible from the road. Okay. It's probably about a quarter of a mile driveway. And but there's a vacant lot that was across the road, and it had like a little drive that went up in it, but it had some overgrowth around it. And I pulled the car down, and I backed up into that driveway and kind of back up into where I was fairly well obscured by the shrubbery and stuff back up in there. And we kind of were staking out our driveway, and we were going to watch and see what Brandon was doing and see if he walked by. And if he went on by, because he had some friends out that way too, he could have been going back out there or somewhere else. So we were going to see if he walked by or if he turned to go up to our house, and we could kind of keep an eye on it from that point, mm-hmm. and maybe not be seen by him or detected by him. And yeah, to make a long story short, we sat there, and he never walked by. But during that meantime, we had already contacted the police, and they were on their way. But we never saw Brandon come by, or so we're not sure where he went. If he turned off there was another dirt road he could have possibly turned off on.
But most importantly, I maybe should brought this up. You saw him walking. You didn't have his wagon with him, right?
There was no wagon. Yeah.
All right. How long would you say you sat there before the police got there?
I think we backtracked.
Yeah.
We backtracked and looked for Brandon, and the police were looking for him on the opposite end, but I think we met up on the hill.
Shelley and I kind of remember that differently, and she may be right and I may be right, but I thought we backtracked after the police showed up, but she seems to think we did it before we drove down there. I mean, So well, at some point we backtracked, whether, her memory's better or mine is probably hers. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go with what she said, but anyway, at some point we backtracked. We didn't see him on the road anywhere. The police show up. They come up and they look around our property again, check everything out. They can't find any trace of him or any evidence of him.
But most importantly, the wagon is gone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, the wagon
is gone.
Mysteriously, the wagon is gone. So we were like, because that was my initial thought when I first saw him is, I didn't think he's coming out to kill us. I thought he's coming back to get his wagon.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought. But, so I was a little shocked to realize that the wagon was missing. So.
Okay. And so you go past him. Do you think that, looking back at it now, do you think that he recognized, he of course knew what kind of car you drove? Do you think he knew it was both of you?
Yeah.
Possibly, quite possibly. Shelley thinks he did, and he could have. But he was also kind of scatterbrained sometimes, and depending on his state of mind, he may not have even been paying attention to cars. I don't know.
Okay.
So it's possible.
Okay, so you get up there. You please, Shelley, go ahead, please.
Well, he does not remember probably this, but I was talking to the police and begging them to come on out because they've already been here twice.
Yeah.
And he was kind of cocky with me. And, I said, he has threatened my husband with death. And he said, well, all we can do is trespassing.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have a protection order.
Right. Okay.
So I tried to jog his memory because that was our fear. He was coming out to kill us.
Yeah, I think everybody who's listening right now probably thinks the same thing. I think everybody would have been thinking that, of course. Being that, especially since you know that there was proof that he had been at your house that day with that wagon being there. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. So you go up there, you kind of stake out the place. You never do see Brandon again. The police show up. They, of course, go through the entire property and everything again. Of course, nothing, of course, he wasn't there, but this wagon somehow went missing, even though you two did not see him pass to go up into your driveway or whatever. And we have to remember this is a wagon, so it's going to be a little difficult to maybe pull through the woods or something. So, and this is the last time when you passed him, that's the last time you saw Brandon.
That's the last time we saw him. And as far as we know, that's the last time anyone saw him. We haven't, in 3 years of, asking and searching and looking for answers, we haven't seen anybody that can verifiably say that they have spoke to him or seen him after that day.
Before that day, when was the last time that Brandon was at your house? Best guess. A month before, 2 weeks before, 2 months before?
Over a year.
Over a year.
I don't recall it being that long, but it's possible.
It is, because if you
Pretty
think
long.
about it, it's been over a year.
Yeah.
All right, so it was a long time since he had been, at your house, even though I realize he's homeless, but he's living with your daughter. If he wanted to go out, I guess he could have. If he wanted to go out, maybe your daughter, Ashton, would have driven him out there or something. But it had been a long time since he had been at your house. Then all of a sudden, there's the wagon there. You see him walking on the road, and that's the last time he's ever seen on June 24th of 2020.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
That's what we understand at that point. Now later we're led to believe something a little different. And if you want to,
we'll just keep going this in the timeline. So your place gets checked out. He's not there. What goes on for the next few days? What were you thinking at the time? Anybody call? Once again, right there within those first few days, anybody call to say, like a neighbor say, you know what, I think I saw your son walking on the street. What went on for those next few days?
Well, I think it was very early on, that day or maybe the next day, I talked to some neighbors who are actually I have the neighbors that's cousin to me, and talking to them, they informed us that they had saw Brandon walking earlier on the 24th, pulling the wagon toward Fayetteville, and they saw him approximately 45 minutes before we saw him. And he was about 2 miles from our house at that point.
But going away from your house, not toward it.
Going away from our house.
Okay. Okay, so that you found that out just a couple days after. Any other sightings other than that you would believe, once again, around your area of your house, within a couple miles of your house?
No.
I got a little scared the next night and had to call the police back because when you're here all alone and you hear bumps and
Sure, absolutely.
And I wasn't.
She was on high alert, so
yeah, I was.
Of course.
And I was on oxygen at the time, and so when they got here, I was just frantic, and so they kept on. They check on me for a little while,
they did increase patrols during the night.
Yeah,
she was concerned. Yeah.
But we only had the one camera at the time, and I had that, and he worked nights, and so it was kind of hard. I couldn't walk, so there was no way. I just had to sit here and let what happened happen. So, but he never did show. Just the 24th was it.
Okay. Regarding your property, how big, if I may ask, how big is your property? How many acres?
We have 10 acres.
10 acres. All right. So not small property. Did you kind of like when feeling maybe a little more relaxed, maybe 2 days later, did you ever go walk out in the woods to see if you could find anything, connected to Brandon? Anything maybe, for example, that you saw in the wagon that might have gotten left behind? Anything like that?
I think I do recall, doing kind of a search just kind of around we have 10 acres, but it's mostly wooded. So we have like a spot carved out for a house, and so that we have a lawn. So just kind of in the woods around the perimeter of the lawn area, and and kind of around some of the outbuildings, and we have a crawl space that goes up under the house, and I think I kind of looked up underneath there, and somebody wasn't hiding in there or anything like that, and but I didn't go out and try to attempt to cover the whole 10-acre wooded property by myself and look it over.
Okay. You did mention that you had a security system installed. Were there any cameras on the outside of the house that would have caught Brandon coming to your house with the leaving the wagon there, coming back to get it, anything like that?
No, because we did that after.
You did that after.
Yeah,
Okay.
shortly after, I think within a few days or a week or something after, which we installed that, because she was home at night by herself and she didn't feel comfortable being there. And I thought that would give me a little bit more of ability to kind of keep an eye on her and make her feel a little bit more secure. So we went ahead and did that.
Okay. So the most important part to understand about this is you see him. Of course, people are maybe looking for him. The police are maybe looking for him. Of course, you have this protection order and everything else. But no missing persons report was filed at that day. Of course, for obvious reasons. I mean, you saw him, but and didn't see him, but you weren't seeing really him anyway.
Right.
So we have to understand for this disappearance for everybody that yes, the last day that we trust, of course, Brandon's parents saw him on June 24th, but that's not when the missing persons report was filed. What was the eventual decider of a report actually being filed for his disappearance, and when did that happen?
Yeah, we had we kind of struggled with it. We were obviously very concerned about our son and where he was and what was going on with him. We made numerous attempts to try to contact him, through social media and through his messenger and calling his phone and things like that. And any way we could get a hold of him. No answer. But then again, he had also said, you're not gonna have contact with me. And at one point, he said, the next time you hear from me, it'll be through my lawyer. And he was pretty much, given his state of mind and everything, what he was believing about us and about me personally, what I was doing to him. We were kind of like, he's just hiding out, or he's chosen not to have contact with us.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's kind of where we were.
Right. So what was the final decider, though? Why did somebody, or you or somebody, finally file a missing persons report for him? Why?
Well, we live in Fayetteville's like almost 100,000 people, Fayetteville proper, and it's the metropolitan area around Fayetteville. It's the second largest, population in the state. We know a lot of people, have a lot of friends, and and no one saw Brandon for a long time. We kept, has anybody seen him or heard from him? And we would periodically have people say, well, hey, I was at Schmitty's garage, and it's a restaurant, and we saw Brandon there, and but no one had seen him. And even though he was distant with us, he had some cousins that he would contact occasionally and talk to, an aunt or two that he was kind of liked, and he would contact them. Sometimes my mother. But no one had heard from him or seen from him, and it was getting to be quite a while. So we were starting to get concerned, and we, kept trying to send him messages. We never heard anything from him. And then we realized that he had a court date coming up, and if he didn't show up for that court date, he was going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
So we were waiting to kind of see if the court date came up in September. Is that what you said?
No, we had a phone call in September.
Oh, but we had a court date coming up. I think it was in October, right?
Yeah.
So the court date was coming up in October, and we were kind of waiting to see if he showed up for his court date. And then, of course, as it gets, a few weeks before the court date, we're looking on the court docket page and everything, and they posted the notice up that says all the court dates have been postponed due to COVID. They pushed it off to January.
Okay.
So we're like, oh no, that's because we were really wanting to see, if he showed up or whatever. So we continued to try to contact him, and again, not knowing whether there had been something happen to him or he was just, choosing not to be in contact with us. And we ended up waiting until January till they actually did have the court date, and he didn't show up. And then a few days later, we went up and filed a police report.
And it's actually the day that he got a bench warrant, so it worked out wonderfully. Detectives told us.
All right, so it all happened at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we should also note that you're not just people hadn't seen or anything, but for example, being that he liked to go on Facebook or whatever and post, you already talked about this rant that he had posted at some point, well before he went missing, but he wasn't making any social media posts either. That also ended seemingly on June 24th, 2020.
Right. Yes.
Okay. So that June 24th, 2020 kind of is the connection in all this. You last saw him, maybe somebody else saw him, maybe a little later, walking the opposite direction, possibly. But after that, nobody's seen him and nobody had any interaction with him. For example, your daughter, Ashton, hadn't heard from him, even though he had just been living with her like a couple months before that. All of that just totally stopped.
Right. And yeah, that's correct. We had no contact with him. But there's a couple of little elements there, like the people that we did say that said they had saw him pulling the wagon the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. That was prior to us seeing him. So that was like 45 minutes before we saw him. So that would have still put us as being the last people that saw him. Right. Now, early on, we had kind of talked to, well, no, I guess that was shortly after we filed the police report, and I may be jumping ahead a little bit there. Filed the missing persons report. Police, started doing their investigation. and they came out, and that's when they told us about the incident that happened at Walmart. But
Okay,
the way
that's right. You mentioned that before. So this is right around then after he goes missing. This is when you find out where he had been like hours before he was seen at your place.
right, we would file the missing persons report.
Mm.
The police had done a very limited preliminary investigation, and maybe a week or two later after we file the report, and they come out and say, well, we've been doing some looking, and this is what we found out, that after you guys saw him, he was seen at Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that was after that we
Mm-hmm.
saw him. So we were thought that Walmart, we didn't even know about that incident, but so we were led to believe it was later in the evening,
Yeah.
after we saw him, that he was seen at Walmart. So that kind of eased some of our fears a little bit, that hey, okay, he made it back to Fayetteville.
Mm-hmm.
And then the police also told us that in
Yeah,
December,
we're gonna get to the mistakes. We'll get to those a little later. That's totally fine. We're gonna get to those. That's totally fine. We'll get to the mistakes. All right, but I want to go to this next because it's gonna lead into this Wendy Smith person. What have you learned anything about his phone information? Of course, he was prolific on social media. Obviously using his phone to do this. I don't know if he had a service, probably getting free Wi-Fi from Walmart or somewhere. But have you ever gotten any information of the police in the last 3 years, let's say, gotten any information regarding the last ping, anything like that?
no, not really. The police don't tell us a lot of stuff. It's an ongoing investigation. We have filed FOIA, Freedom of Information Act papers to try to find out what's going on, and they will give us stuff up until the time that Brandon was reported missing, but they say that's an ongoing investigation, and they will not release any records to us. Now, from talking to the detectives, they have told us, a little bit of stuff that, hey, we're subpoenaing this and we're subpoenaing that, and we really didn't find anything on the phone records, or we just kind of basic generic information, not anything detailed at all.
Okay, so we don't have any information there at all. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised by that. But that does bring us to this, and this woman whose name is Wendy Smith, allegedly. Please explain this story. When did this happen? Why did this happen?
Well, now to clarify, to be transparent about this, we don't know this lady's name. Where it stems from is we got a phone call. I'll just set it up like this. We got a phone call. Brandon had been missing. This was probably in September, after Brandon went missing in June or so, and we had been calling and checking about Brandon and asking family if they had heard from him. And my mother happened to come over that day, and it was kind of odd because we'd just been talking, and she said, have you heard anything from Brandon? Has anybody seen him? And we were like, no, we haven't seen him. And then I'm kind of standing in my kitchen, and my mom's in the living room, and my phone starts ringing. I reach in my pocket and pull it out, and it's got Brandon's picture on it, because I had it set up to where it would show his picture when it rang. And I answer the phone, and a female voice answers, and I'm hello, and she just says hi, and she just said, doesn't really say anything, just kind of sits there. And I said, you're calling on my son's phone. I said, who are you, and why do you have my son's phone? And she said, she said, this is my dad's phone. And I said, okay. I said, who's your dad? And she said, John Smith. And I'm
All
like,
right.
okay, that doesn't sound suspicious at all.
Of
But
course not.
she said her dad's
What are
name
the
is
odds?
John. Yeah, and she goes on to explain that her dad was a homeless gentleman who lived in the Fayetteville area, and he had died. I guess they found him on the trail, something. I don't know if it was natural causes or what, but he was found dead, and this phone was his. It was one of his possessions, and the police had turned it over to her or something, or she had gotten it some way through the possessions of her dad. I don't know how exactly that transfer happened, but anyway, she was supposedly calling people on his address book, people that acquaintances and friends, and notifying them that her dad had passed away. And I, kind of thought it was a little odd, but not outside the realm of possibility, due to the fact that Brandon would frequently call me from odd numbers, and he was a lot of times very difficult to track down and get a hold of. So a lot of times when he would call me from a number that I didn't recognize, I would go ahead and add it to my phone contact as a number. And so I thought, well, maybe he was just borrowing this John Smith's phone. Right. And I had saw that this is the number he's calling me from, so I added it as a contact.
Yep, makes sense.
In case I needed to get a hold of him in the future, So he, I didn't really think a lot about it, and I offered my condolences and said, "Well, I'm sorry to hear about your dad. I didn't personally know him, but sorry, you're dealing with this death of your dad." And got off the phone with her and didn't really think a whole lot about it. Thought it was a little bit odd. But then, like the next day, I think, I feel my phone vibrating in my pocket, and I pull it out, and I'm butt dialing somebody, and I look, and it's the phone number that I supposed to be Brandon's, that the lady had. I was dialing it back, and I'm just going to see if anybody answers. So I just sit there. It doesn't answer. It goes to voicemail. But then when it goes to voicemail, it's, "Hello, you've reached the phone of Brandon Barron. Sorry, I can't take your call right now."
Wow.
So, and
wow.
it didn't dawn on me just instantly. I just go, "Oh, okay. Well, it went to voicemail." And I thought, wait a minute,
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, if that's her dad's phone, why is Brandon's voicemail on it? I said, that's kind of. So we contacted the police and everything, and they tried to, look it up, and they really couldn't find out any information, and they weren't really very successful in tracking anything down.
They did track that phone down.
Well, they found the phone records. They did not track the phone down.
That was the phone he was usually took the picture on.
I know, but they never found the phone.
All right.
And I know they didn't. They never found
They never found the phone.
They never found the phone. They did subpoena the phone records. And they saw that it was made to my phone, but that was after the time that Brandon lost it. So,
and once again, to remind everybody, when did this call happen? When this woman called you, when did that happen?
Don't have an exact date. Sometime probably mid-September, something like that,
of 2020.
2020.
All right, so 3 months out later after his disappearance.
And then the connection with the name Wendy Smith. We're not even sure about that. That's we had a lady for a short time that was somewhat of a private investigator that was kind of looking to see if she could find out any information on Brandon, and she came up with the name Wendy Smith because apparently she supposedly had some law enforcement connections, and she was able to look at some stuff that I couldn't go look up, or other people can go look up. But she had saw some of the intake reports from when Brandon was incarcerated on some of his previous charges for I don't know which one or what. But she had saw at one point he had put the name Wendy Smith as a contact on as somebody to contact, for when he on the intake papers for the jail for being incarcerated. So. And that's where, the theory, she kind of had that theory that Wendy Smith could possibly be the daughter of John Smith, who had the phone.
Yeah, so, unfortunately, Smith is the most common last name in the United States. Yeah. It's not like my name. Denzel is really, really, really rare. Even in Germany, which is where my ancestors are from. So it's not something like that. So I guess what you're saying is when you talk to this woman, she didn't give her name.
She did not.
So she said she was calling people just to let everybody know that her father was deceased. But then once again later, when you made this mistake, like the next day, you call it back, and it's still Brandon's voicemail on this phone.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And I called the phone numerous times after that, and I never can get any kind of response or call or text message or anything to go through, so it just kind of
Okay.
goes silent.
Did you happen to just I know you told the police about this, but yourself, like, keep an eye on like obituaries in the Fayetteville area? Was there somebody who a guy who died around that time that you might be able to connect to what she was talking about? Or do you look back at this, your instincts, and say, you know what, I think she might have been making this up? What do your instincts tell you?
I did.
You did?
I did look at it.
Did you
I didn't see
did not
nobody.
find anything? Well, that
No.
you would think that would be something that, and I, didn't really. I kind of thought about that much later, but you would think that if somebody was found, a homeless man that was found dead in Fayetteville,
They
the
don't put it
police
up
would
there.
probably know about it. I mean, you would think they would know that, hey, there was a man found dead in Fayetteville, a homeless man. So, that should be something that would be verifiable with them. And maybe that's I don't, have we ever asked Detective Morse that if they ever found a John Smith dead? They didn't. So,
No, I looked it up too. But with being homeless, it's gonna be a pauper's grave. And they don't necessarily, because he had an uncle that passed away, or a step uncle, and there was no obituary. His brother didn't put obituary up.
just because you're homeless doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah,
you're in a pauper's grave.
But your uncle wasn't homeless either. He was just poor.
I know, but I'm just saying, he may have had family that was, for mental reasons or whatever, he may have had family that was very well off and able to give him a proper burial, so I don't know anything about, or he could be totally fictitious.
All right.
And
I guess what we're saying here is there was nothing that really jumped out in any media there. Homeless, quote unquote, homeless man found dead, and nothing, no story like that. And looking at obituaries in the area, you were never able to connect the two.
I personally never looked at obituaries, but she may have at that
did.
time. But
Yeah.
so I think she may have looked in there, but we didn't, not made aware of anything like that.
Okay, so almost 3 years later, the story this woman told on the phone is unverifiable.
Unverifiable.
It very well may be true, but there's nothing to support what she said.
The only thing verifiable is that I got a phone call, and that when I dialed that number back, it was Brandon's phone because it had his voicemail on it.
What happens when you call that phone now 3 years later? Is it still Brandon's voicemail or what?
I think it goes to a different person or somebody else.
It's already.
It's been reissued maybe to a different person or something.
Detective told me that they recycled that number. It was actually the phone that Brandon's step was on through the police. It was actually a police number.
The one that he had gotten from the monitoring, the company that did the monitoring.
And it was also, our number was on the last one. It was on there.
Okay.
She didn't call anybody else.
Yeah, so that's
so
odd.
that kind of flies in the face of what she said. I'm calling all my father's friends. It seems like after she talked to you, she didn't call anybody else.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is what
All
detective
right, so
told us.
that to me undermines her story certainly. All right, moving on to this. Any searches ever done around your house? Being that you two were the last one to see him, makes sense that there might be some searches done. Any searches done in that maybe 2 mile perimeter diameter of that area? Anything like that?
Well, in 2021, we reported him missing in January. We started out the police officer, then it got switched to detective, and they went to do a search, and right off the bat, because they went and investigated it first, and then the things come up with, I don't know if we got to that part. Salvation Army.
No, we haven't got to the mistakes
But-
yet. Yeah.
But so he went and did first time I ever met detective, and I said, I just feel like I need to walk these woods, and I couldn't. And I just feel him in the woods. I said, I just know he's in the woods. So, but he didn't take it serious. So in 2022, we've been living all this thing where Brandon's possibly missing out of Fayetteville. So 2022, found out it's debunked, and I started begging the detective to look for my son. And it took me from March to December to get him out here to search. 2 years after he's been missing. So they come out and searched in December of 2019. They done from about a mile from our house where Brandon was last seen to the creek banks, and then some of the creek banks. And so happened it snowed the day before, so the cadaver dogs' noses were cold. So they weren't as sharp, but they still did. Cadaver dogs did an awesome job. But they searched a mile back to our house. They just stayed on our property, searching, no Brandon. And that was all we knew that they searched. And we had a guy come and search on his own. And he found some things. And that was pretty close where Brandon was missing. And so that was on like a Friday. And he didn't get a hold of the police until Saturday night. He was working, and I said, you need to make sure. He tried to call the police at the police department, and
yeah, it was actually the wee hours of Sunday morning when I called. I had went down there. That guy went out and looked on a Friday and told me he had found a few items, and so I went down Saturday because I was familiar with exactly where he told me he had found these items. And then what he told me he found was some clothing and some bones, but he was reasonably certain the bones were animal bones. And the clothing, he said he saw some random clothing that was half buried in the dirt. So, I went down there and looked, and I found the clothing that he was talking about. And I did see the bones, and some of them were clearly animal bones. And I had the feeling, there was, some bones scattered around, not just, they were very far scattered. And I was like him. I was reasonably certain they were animal bones. They weren't, some of them were skulls, that obviously were for some kind of a smaller animal. But, there were some small bones that, could possibly have been, finger bones, toe bones, or whatever. But then again, I just thought they were animal bones. Did see the clothing, and I thought, well, it doesn't really look like the kind of clothing Brandon would wear. And, there was the remnants of a trash sack that the clothing were in. And when I saw Brandon's wagon that day, I didn't recall seeing a black trash sack in there. So didn't really think it was anything to do with Brandon's, but I thought, hey, since I'm here, I'm going to look around on my own. So I kind of started, walking back and forth up and down the creek and kind of widening my path as I, went up the creek, progressing out more toward it's got the creek and then the road. And I was kind of going back and forth, searching the area between the creek and the road. And at one point I came upon and this is all in a floodplain. So there's, ground shifting and moving all the time with rains and things. Yeah. But I found some blue fabric cloth, kind of a canvasy type material sticking up out of the dirt. And I kind of brushed it around with my foot and got down and looked at it. And it looked very similar, like it could be the type of material you would see on a collapsible portable wagon, like a beach wagon.
Like Brandon's.
Yeah. So I thought, hey, maybe there's something here. And I for a minute, I thought, well, I'll dig it up and see what it is. And then I remembered the detectives had told me, if you're free to go search, we'll do whatever you want to do, but if you find anything, try not to disturb it or whatever. So I said, I'm not going to dig it up. I'm just going to let the police know what I found, and I'll let them proceed however they, want to proceed. And so I didn't call them immediately, and because I think I went down, didn't I search it on my way to work or something a little ways? No, it was actually that Saturday morning when I got off, and I'd been up all night. So I came home and went to sleep. And when I woke up, I told Shelley that I found this part of this.
I was at a thing in Branson with a
Where,
bunch of ladies.
is that where you were at? But at some point I told you or whatever, and then you started telling me, hey, you need to let the police know about this. So Sunday morning, because I was thinking about waiting to Monday, because I didn't figure there'd be anybody. Of course they would have, but I know our detective wouldn't be there on the weekend. So I was planning on waiting to Monday, but she encouraged me to call them. So I called them Sunday morning. They said they would dispatch some deputies out there.
No, it was Saturday night because you left a message. And I got a call that morning saying they're coming out that morning, so we missed church.
Sunday morning, yeah, I got home and kind of took a little short nap, and we were getting ready to go to church, and the police called us and they said, hey, can you meet us down there? And I said, sure. So we ended up not making it to church that morning, and stopped down there, and I took the detectives and the police out and showed them exactly the things I'd found and seen. And they dug the material, the blue cloth that I'd seen in the ground. They dug it up, and it ended up being a soft-sided little small cooler or lunchbox kind of a thing that was buried up in the dirt, and no indication that it belonged to Brandon or anything. So, I don't really recall seeing anything like that in his possession. So it was probably something unrelated, and they kind of did a very, very, very limited search and kind of roamed around a little bit, kind of, looked around a little, and I showed them some of the clothing that I found there where the other gentleman had found the clothing, but then also there was a few other places where I saw some, one part, there was in the dry creek bed, there was on a branch, there was some shorts, like, somebody's shorts hanging, not underwear, but like swimming trunk looking shorts hanging there they were faded and been there for a long time. And a couple of other clothing articles, an old t-shirt or something. Have no idea if it was Brandon's or who they could have belonged to, but made them aware of those, and they kind of looked at that stuff, and okay. They did pick up some of the bones, and they took them, and they said they were going to send them off to their bone guy. That's a bone expert, and very shortly after that, like a day or two, they came back and said, oh, the bones that they found were animal bones, which I kind of suspected all along. They weren't human bones. But the detective did tell us at that time, he said, yeah, don't worry about it. We're going to come back out and do another search, and we'll bring out, a lot more manpower, and we'll come out and we'll comb this whole area, and we'll check it really well.
In a day or two.
Yeah, in a day or two. Well, like that was Sunday morning, and then like by end of the week, we said, hey, did you guys get back out and check the area? And they said, oh no, we're sorry. We've been in training all week, and we haven't had time to get out there. We'll try to set something up next week. And then next week we called them, and they said, oh no, we still had some training to finish up early in the week, and we haven't got out there. And eventually it just kind of got pushed to the side, and several weeks or months went by, and
month at least,
over a month, and they still had never came out and did the search. And then at one point, Shelley was very upset that they hadn't came out and did the search. But I remember we asked him, we actually, because a lot of times we would have trouble just calling them up and getting to talk to somebody. So what we've resorted to is a lot of times if we need to talk to them, we'll just drive up and go up to their sheriff's department, go in and say, hey, we want to speak to Detective Morris. And that seems to be the best way to get, personal contact with him. So we drove up there, and we went in and talked to him, and we asked him, did you guys ever do the search? And he kind of says, well, we can do that if you want us to. And we were like, you told us you were going to come out, you were definitely going to do it. Now it's like, well, if you're making a special request for us to do it, we'll go out and do it. So it didn't seem to be high priority on their list. And, I think it was a half-hearted search at best. And
Did you not tell me that at one point that they weren't going to do a search, or Texas EquuSearch was involved, but then they weren't involved because there was a warrant out for Brandon? Did you not tell me that?
No,
I don't. The
No, it
Texas
weren't.
EquuSearch did get involved, and we, kind of lobbied them to try to get them to come up and search, and they finally agreed that they were going to come up and do a search.
Right.
And we were excited about that, and Shelly has some issues where because of her stroke, she doesn't deal with stress very well, and it really causes her, when she gets under a lot of stress, she doesn't handle it very well. Her body, actually, she has physical symptoms from it, makes her very ill. So I was kind of concerned that it was going to be one of these things where they're going to say they're going to come up and do a search, and then they'll she'll get all hyped up about it and excited about it, and then something will happen and end up falling through. So when I found, I really wasn't familiar with Texas EquuSearch, but in one of the conversations I had with our contact lady at Texas EquuSearch, they said they were coming up to do what they called a recon search. And they said, we're going to come up and we're going to do kind of a preliminary small scale search. We'll only bring 3 or 4 people. And we're going to do an assessment and see what sort of resources we need to bring. They said sometimes we utilize drones. We have ATVs. We can do horseback. Various boots on the ground. Certainly, and they had the different options available to them. They wanted to see what would be most appropriate for our terrain, our area, and all that. So at that point, I did ask her. I said, "Now, are you guys definitely coming up to do a bigger search, or is this going to be a situation where you come up and look it over, and then you might end up saying, oh, well, we've decided not to do the search now at this time, because of what we find out on the recon search?" And she said, no, we're definitely, we will come up and do a bigger search. We're going to do that. This is just to, verify information and figure out what kind of resources we need, and, just reconnaissance kind of things. And I said, okay, well, that's great. So they end up, and this is like a month or so before they had done their little search, the police had done, I had done the thing down there, right?
a couple
Couple of months maybe afterwards, and we'd kind of been harping on the sheriff's department to do that search, and then finally they're, well, we can do it if you want us to, kind of thing. And up until like 2 weeks before Texas EquuSearch came out, Shelly asked them, and they said, no, we have not done that search. And we're
so good.
and then it was kind of our understanding that they weren't going to do it because they knew Texas EquuSearch was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, it kind of made sense to me, but she was a little disappointed, but
Texas EquuSearch.
huh?
We knew Texas EquuSearch.
Yeah. So I thought, they're better equipped probably to handle it there, and have probably, frankly, more experience than our little sheriff's department here, looking for missing persons and things like that. So we were excited to have that going on. And then Texas EquuSearch would not do the search unless they got permission from the Washington County Sheriff's Department. And so we kind of had to, Washington County said, oh, we can't call in anybody. We that's not something we do. So finally we got a meeting with the sheriff, and we talked to the sheriff himself and explained to him our situation. He said he had no problems with Texas EquuSearch coming in and whatever. And then I explained to them that they really, all they're looking for is for you to tell them that by them coming up and doing the search, that they're not doing anything that's going to jeopardize your investigation or interfere with it in any way. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why they want the Washington County Sheriff's Department involved in it. And so after kind of clearing all that up, we got them together, and they got the blessing, or said it was okay for them to come up and do the search. Set up a time. Texas EquuSearch came up. They met with us, talked to us maybe a couple hours, and there was like 4 of them showed up, and they said, look, asked us a bunch of questions, had a pretty good interview, and they were taking notes and everything. And then after they left, they said, well, we're going to go down and look at the area over where Brandon disappeared. And
Talk to detectives.
And then they were going to go talk to the detectives. And they left here, and it's a mile from our house, like I said, where Brandon disappeared. They left here, and it was maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes later. Shelly and I, we was getting late. We didn't have any time really to cook anything. So we said, well, we're just going to run over here and grab a hamburger in West Fork. So we ran to West Fork to grab a hamburger. And it was like I said, only 30, 45 minutes after they had left our house. And we drive by, and they've got their trucks down there, and they've got lawn chairs out, and they're sitting behind their truck in lawn chairs.
Only talking detectives.
And
Only talking detectives.
well, I didn't see the detectives there, but they may have been talking to them on the phone or what, I don't know. But anyway, so we drove on to West Fork, got our hamburger, and shortly after getting our hamburger, they called up and said, oh, we're packing it up here. And it couldn't have been, they couldn't have been down there more than maybe an hour at max, right?
They were looking for another person.
Well,
they're looking for
that's what I'm saying. But they were leaving that area. They were so they were packing up where they were there doing their recon search or whatever for Brandon. It couldn't have lasted more than an hour, what Texas EquuSearch did. And then they were asking me information about a character that lived out this way that was known to have a lot of associations with homeless people, and has a house, kind of halfway between Fayetteville and where we live.
Mm-hmm.
And he routinely takes in homeless people and everything. And the police had talked to him sometime earlier in the year, and they showed him Brandon's picture and asked him if he knew him, and he said he didn't know Brandon, but he had seen him before around some of the homeless camps in Fayetteville and stuff. And the gentleman told the police, well, give me a week and I'll find it for you. He said, I've got lots of connections in the homeless community. And, police said, okay, yeah, make sure you let us know. And they never heard anything back from him.
Of course they didn't.
Was unable to find him or whatever. But the Texas EquuSearch went down and talked to that gentleman again. And, he didn't know anything. And then I think, did they go talk to the sheriff's office again after that?
They were talking to him out here. They had everything.
Okay. I guess maybe they were doing a phone conference with him or something.
No, they were talking to him out here.
Oh, well, maybe they showed up there. I don't know how they were talking. At some point, they talked with the sheriff's office again, and they informed us that they're heading back home, which they told us earlier that day they were going to be there at least one more night.
No, they told me they was going to be there 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, but anyway, they were supposed to be there longer. But then after the meeting with the sheriff, mysteriously they're going home right away, and they left. And then we sent a message, say, hey, what's going on? And then later in the day, we get a text message that says, sorry, we're not going to be able to do the search. And we're like, what? What's going on here? Why you're not going to be able to do the search? And then finally, they sent us another text message and said, well, look, we talked to the police, and they've already done some searches out there. And we did go check out some of the homeless camps in Fayetteville. And, we talked to this Mike Brown character. And right now, we don't think a search is warranted or whatever. So they canceled the search on us. And then a few days later, I did get a phone call from one of the gentlemen that came up to interview us, and he, was apologizing profusely. And he said, that kind of thing should have never been handled by text message, and they should have gave us a personal phone call and, explained to him. And I kind of tried to, I was kind of left not really understanding, how we went from, we're definitely going to come back and do a large scale search to, no, we're not able to do it now. I don't know how we got there. And, the only thing we saw was that shortly after they talked to Washington County Sheriff's Department, then it seems like the search is, pretty much nipped in the bud. So, and then another thing is, then a little bit later, we asked them what about the search you guys were supposed to do? And they said, oh, we already did that. And we're like, really? When did that happen? And they said, oh, it was like a week before the Texas EquuSearch.
They didn't tell us.
They didn't tell us when, but they somehow, somewhere in between, because like Shelley 2 weeks of that before had asked them and they had done the search. And then afterwards we find out that somewhere in there, they supposedly did come back and do a more detailed search. Okay. So, and we
all right. So Texas EquuSearch was involved for a while. Are they going to be involved anytime in the future?
They said they would.
There's no immediate plans for them to be involved, but they said they did tell us that, hey, we're not writing this off. We're going to wait for more information. And, if there are further developments in this case, we would definitely come back up and do a bigger search. Okay. But I don't know what, I guess maybe if somebody found, compelling, because just to be fair and honest, I mean, Brandon disappeared out in this area, but, literally he could be anywhere. I mean, he could, somebody
could be.
I mean, there's no hard evidence to link him to being in the woods around our house. But that's just, if you lose something, where do you look for it? The last place you saw it.
Right.
It's usually, and that's what we're going on. I mean, we don't have anything else. So
let's move on to this. What about this wagon? Of course, it's not been found either. I mean, of course, we realize that humans or animals or biological organisms, leave them out in the woods or something, they're going to deteriorate. But the wagon would not. Has this wagon ever been tracked down anywhere? Seen anywhere?
Never been seen. Never heard of again. So that seems to be one of the mysteries, and that's why we had some signs and stuff made up, and we made sure to. I didn't have a exact picture of Brandon's wagon, his literal wagon, but I posted a picture of a similar wagon and said Brandon was seen pulling a wagon that looked something like this. And, if you've seen Brandon or his wagon, somewhere in our area, abandoned or whatever, please call Washington County Sheriff. And we have gotten no feedback, or no one's claiming to have seen the wagon, or it just seems to have vanished off the face of the earth. So,
all right. So we realize, we've covered enough disappearances on Unfound where remains have been found, bones, everything. It's all very sad, but we realize the biological organisms that, deteriorate, disintegrate over time. But of course, plastic and rubber and things, that takes a lot longer, maybe never. And this wagon, of course, we have to remember it's on wheels. So how would you take that out into the woods somewhere without a path? But seemingly it has never been seen again. And we also have to remember there was stuff in this wagon. It is still missing, along with Brandon. Now, we have kind of touched upon just a little bit some of these mistakes that the police have made. One regarding the Salvation Army. Why don't we talk about those right now, which is also complicated, trying to investigate this, because people, not you, but people who should know better, got their dates wrong. Why don't you explain that?
Yeah, it's, we kind of waited quite a while to turn Brandon, report him as missing, because at that point we weren't sure whether, his being absent in our lives was because that was what he chose to do, or there was some kind of some nefarious activity or something unfortunate had happened to him or something. We didn't know. So, we were kind of really watching this court date thing, and because we thought, we know he should have to show up for this court date. And then it got pushed off. So that kind of made us a little bit more anxious. And then coupled with the fact that no family members, no friends that we could find, no one acquaintances had seen him, period, or said that they had seen him when we asked. We were, after he missed his January court date, a couple of days after, we said, we're going to file a missing persons report. So we filed the missing persons report. And then like a few weeks later or whatever, we checked back with them. And that's when the police tell us, oh, well, after Brandon, was seen out here after you saw him, he was in Fayetteville and he got treated. An ambulance was called and he refused medical treatment, so they just left him, and he was staying in a homeless camp out behind Fayetteville. So, okay, well, at least he made it back to Fayetteville. And then they come up a little while later and they say, okay, we've done some more checking around, and he was kicked out of the Salvation Army December the 4th of 2020.
So like 6 months after you last saw him. So this gives you hope that he was still alive then. Yeah.
Right. So for violating curfew, supposedly he got kicked out of the Salvation Army. So we're like, okay. And so that kind of all that situation led us to not focus on looking in the woods or searching around this area, because we had what we thought was reliable, credible information that he wasn't, the last place he was seen wasn't in this area. And at some point, when did Detective Morris let us know that in May, you said?
It was in March of 2022.
March of 2022.
Okay.
They come back and they said, okay, this case had gotten kind of stale. So we went back and re-interviewed everybody. And we kind of made some mistakes and said, okay, what's going on? And they said, well, the Walmart incident where we saw him, that was at 3 a.m. that morning.
Before you two saw him.
And we were kind of led to believe that it was later in the day after that.
Okay.
So it was in the AM hours before he ever came out here with his wagon or whatever. And then they also proceed to tell us that, we got our dates wrong on the sighting where the information where he was kicked out of the Salvation Army for violating curfew, and that actually occurred in 2019, not 2021, 2020.
All right. So in one case, they make a mistake even though it was a mistake of only maybe 12 to 14 hours, it's still a mistake, but at least it's on the same day. But what you're saying here is they made a mistake by an entire year.
Yeah.
And there was another one too, where his friend dropped him off in July at a trails to walk.
Yeah.
And that was wrong too. And I found out about that one because that was the only extra thing that was out there besides Salvation Army. So I called her up and said, I questioned her over and over and over for about an hour.
She grilled her.
I did. And she was willing to answer. And I'm thankful, but she dropped him off July 2019.
Not in July 2020, which would have been, a few weeks after his actual disappearance.
Right.
Is once again, so people, we on Unfound, we talk a lot about how people can get dates and things wrong. This is why that I personally am so dismissive of eyewitness accounts and everything. When the police can't even get a year right, then how can anything really be trusted regarding eyewitnesses, especially if you're talking to them days later, weeks later, or whatever else? It's just not how the brain really works. Whereas with you two, you saw him on a day that was significant because you had something unique going on that day. So that you're always going to remember. Of course, Brandon's your son too, which helps. But for everybody else, they're just going about their regular business. And It's amazing how the human mind, even though it's a great calculator, cannot keep these kinds of things straight.
Yeah. But yeah, we went from thinking that he had been seen months later, and he had made it to Fayetteville okay and everything, and here we are like a year and 6, 7, 8 months later, we find out no, all that was wrong, and now the last place he was seen was by us.
Yeah,
that corner.
It wasn't some people at Walmart. It wasn't the people at Salvation Army. It wasn't this friend who dropped them off at the trails. It actually eventually all came back to you two.
Yeah. And then that's when we start, wow, we should have been looking in these woods around here and focusing our attention more. And then that's why it was very devastating when Texas EquuSearch pulled out, and she was just, she was a mess for a day or two after that.
Oh, so. Sure. Okay. How hard has this been for you two? Of course, you just mentioned that seconds ago. this is a situation where, he's your son. Of course, you love him. You continue to love him. You're always going to love him. But I also realized, he had made these threats. He had issues, it seemed, going back some years. Was it ever in your mind that, he could go missing given his situation and the drugs and the mental health issues? Was it ever something that you really even thought that could even happen?
No.
I mean, I could see him maybe, because he had talked about it before, and he had talked about possibly moving off to a different state and going to a big city, and he actually tried that at one point and went to San Francisco and lived with a friend out there for a while, and and we called that lady, and she hadn't seen him or heard from him, but I thought maybe he might take off and go to live in a different place, but I thought we would probably on some level have some kind of contact with him, I mean, even if it's infrequent and, sparse, but, we would still, kind of have some idea where he's at and that he's okay. But, it's very unlike Brandon to just have no communication, period, with us to start with. But then when you include his closest friends, family members that he was, frequently in contact with, I mean, nobody. And then, social media stops, completely stops. There's no financial records that we know of any transactions or anything happening after that date. Somebody who is suffering from mental illness plus has, drug problems and is homeless. Quite frequently, they have frequent encounters with law enforcement.
Right.
And there has been no law enforcement, and he's on a national list supposedly. If his name gets ran or his fingerprints show up, him being picked up anywhere in the United States, it's supposed to hit. So what happened to Brandon? I mean, so that leads us to think that possibly he's deceased. We hate to think that, but it's a reality we have to face. He could very well be laying in some of these woods out here, or maybe somebody picked him up and took him off and did something with him. You could speculate anything.
We know really anything right at this point probably is possible. How have your other two children been affected by this?
My daughter's really sick, and she loves her brother. My son loves his brother.
Mm-hmm.
He actually went with us to Never Forgotten.
Yeah.
My kids don't leave. Brandon's always come back to here. No matter what he's done, we love our son.
Yeah.
If we could just find out, even if he did make the conscious decision, hey, I don't want to have anything to do with my parents anymore, that would be something it would hurt, but we could live with it, but just the not knowing and not having any answers, or, whether he's hurt somewhere or he's dead somewhere, or, we just don't know. That's hard.
Do you have a Facebook page, website, anything like that set up for Brandon's disappearance? If so, we can talk about that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, she's got a Facebook page we've set up.
It's trying to look up his link.
Well, you can just if
Well,
they'll search,
just give it the title of it. That'll be fine. The title of the Facebook page.
Help find our missing son, Brandon Barron. That's the
help find our missing son, Brandon Barron. Who, just to remind everybody, that's with 2 R's, Barron. Brandon Barron. Help us find our son, Brandon Barron. That is a Facebook page. Is that a Facebook page that you manage, or do you have somebody running it for you, or what?
Shelley primarily manages it, I think, and I'll get on there every once in a while, but it's 99% Shelley, and I work outside the home, so she's she has more time and more patience for it. I kind of,
Right.
He
Yeah.
does. He does. He helps me pass out posters, and we're trying to understand.
yeah. But it's primarily Shelly's doing, and she's done an awesome job trying to get the word out, and she's, starting to gain a few followers, and we got
Okay.
she was just really excited the other day. She got over 1,100 followers,
Wow.
which is not
Yeah.
a lot, but I mean, by some
No, that's
people,
good. No,
but, yeah.
that's good.
So it's starting to get out there, and we're hoping, maybe some of your listeners can join in, and the more people, more eyes we get on the ground, our eyes on the problem, then the better off we're going to be as far as being able to possibly, getting, just takes that one person that seen something or heard something or knows something to come forward, and this whole situation could change.
Right. Right. Any final words before we complete this interview, Daryl and Shelly? Any final words?
You got any final words?
If Brandon's watching this,
Yeah, we love you, son.
we love you so much.
And if you happen to see this post, I don't know, whatever you've done or whatever you think we've done, you can contact us and we can work through it, and we'll try to help you in whatever way we can, and we just want to know that you're okay. And we love
Daryl
you.
and Shelly, I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we appreciate you, Ed, and
Yeah,
your
thank you.
platform, and thank you so much for having us on and helping us get the word out. I mean, it's I think through people like you and the other platforms, we're gonna maybe be the answer to
so.
getting some more answers.
I hope so too. And you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was part 2 of my August 21st, 2023 interview with the parents of Brandon Barron, Daryl and Shelly Barron. I thank them for appearing on both audio and video for this episode. So you can understand just how close Brandon was to the Barron house when sighted, I've created a map analysis video that you can now find on Unfound's YouTube channel. What caught my ear during the interview, and this is in no way to criticize Daryl and Shelly, both of them are fantastic people, and despite how Brandon acted toward them, they are doing everything in their power to find him. That is what true good parenting is. But you will notice that despite this disappearance being only a little over 3 years old, Daryl and Shelly still have different recollections of certain events and discussions that occurred in 2020. And you could hear in the interview how at least a few points still aren't ironed out here in 2023. And this is despite them surely talking about Brandon's disappearance almost every single day for the past 3 years. All of you need to understand that this is common. Daryl and Shelly are not unique in this regard at all. However, this might not be obvious to all of you because Unfound rarely has 2 guests on at the same time. In addition, the average age of a disappearance this podcast covers is about 22 years old, where recollections and interpretations can deviate wildly after 2 decades. Whereas you don't expect that in a 3-year-old disappearance. However, we should. The human mind is not a computer like the one you're using to listen to this podcast. If you type something into a file and save it, 50 years from now, the file will still have the same data. The brain, not so much. Moreover, computers don't have emotions. At least not yet. Whereas humans do. And this even goes for guests who we've had who didn't even know the missing person at all, but simply have taken interests in disappearances for other reasons. These people can also be affected by their biases, experiences, and work. Having said all that, though, there is no doubt in my mind that Daryl and Shelley have the important details of Brandon as a person and the circumstances of his disappearance correct, which most concerns us here. To conclude, this message is for Daryl and Shelley and all the other families out there. You are not waiting alone. We are all waiting right there alongside you. If you'd like to read and hear my deep analysis of Brandon Barron's disappearance, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast to sign up and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.